All right, so I gotta, hang on, we're gonna switch it out. Agenda. Okay, so approve the agenda. Is everybody good with the agenda?
I'm fine with it. Yeah. Aye.
Okay, so we're good on that one. And any public comments?
Either
Kathleen or Mary?
Kathleen or Amy. Mary doesn't count as the public anymore.
Oh, that's true. Well, technically in this particular group.
That's true. She's a planning commission member who is attending the subcommittee. So yeah.
All right.
I don't have any comment at the moment, but I'm learning.
All right, go ahead, Kathleen.
All right, so correspondence, is everybody good with accepting all the correspondence?
Do you want to, several of them go to the agenda items.
Yes.
The ones that, at least the Lamperti letter from TROC is not to any specific agenda item. It's really informational for this committee. So that is sort of pure correspondence. I think Chris Katuki's letter relates to it, the agenda item.
They all do, and I agree with that. Although the Lamperti sort of indirectly relates to it, because it goes back to the preferred guy. I was fascinated when I saw that. I was kind of like, I actually skimmed it so quickly that I completely missed the word refusal. I just saw Lamperti and said, oh yeah, another accepted, whatever. And Pam, it was only when I sent the agenda in that Pam said, oh yeah, you want their refusal letter. It's like, oh, wow. Okay. So, but I was curious, and again, I think we can incorporate this because as far as preferred, this has nothing to do with Lamperti specifically, but I'm curious when we get into our discussions that the purview was at the regional level, and it's interesting that at the town level, why the select board or the planning commission couldn't be looking at A&R maps in the first place. How did we miss that was a forest block of that nature?
Well, I think it's a good point, because actually I think that when Jay and I were speaking as citizens in that meeting, we were talking about really the need to have a very systematic review of these, and because there are a couple of things. One is that it's in a forest block, two, that it's in on the ridge line, and three, that he had a very conceptual drawing of what he intends to do. And in the TROC letter, they don't address the ridge line. They do address the forest, the fact that it is in a forest zone, which is in the town plan identified as another area that you don't want to divide. And then it also, brought up the point that we made a number of times, which is, we don't really know what he's going to build there. We just have a little circle. And we know from the Upper Loveland Road that circle can change quite dramatically by the time something gets to the PUC, and then you end up fighting it rather than approving, you end up fighting what you approve because you didn't know exactly what you were going to approve. So I would actually suggest that this go back to the planning commission with a discussion about what is the process of reviewing proposals when they need a special exception, and try to put some rigor in rather than, okay, Aaron, it looks great and your neighbors like it kind of thing. And so that you can actually say, what are the specific criteria we have to look at, and make sure you look at all of them. Because obviously, both the planning commission and the select board, at least according to TRORC, which usually has never met many solar things that it didn't like, kind of put the kibosh or put a break on it. So I would suggest that this group bring it back to the planning commission for discussion and review.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I guess we can bounce it around a little bit here in this group, since we're the ones that are the most interested in this topic theoretically. And my question for this is, partly Two Rivers looked at things, or Two Rivers should look at things that are appropriate to the regional commission. I mean, there's a reason that all three groups look at it, and to some degree, they're looking at it from different angles. And so it may be, that's why all three, it's not any one of the three, or the select board should rubber stamp because the planning commission approved or the regional commission should. So each should look independently, and you got to have all three. So that's the way it worked, and that's good. My question is to the planning commission's view. What are we chartered to look at?
Yeah.
Meaning we can look at scenic, we can look at ridgeline, and then ridgeline can flag scenic. You look at consistency with town plan.
Right.
Because of the default default preferred siting, then consistency with town plan goes to ridgeline only. If he wasn't in the ridgeline, what do we have? So that's my question, and that I agree that better guidelines, and that's why we have a solar siting subcommittee, better guidelines would be good, but it has to be within the context of what the municipal planning commission is empowered to look at in net metering implications.
So I think that this all ties in really well with the rewrite, the amendments of the 510. So I find it fascinating when I saw that, because I was thinking it would be a great study, just like Mary was saying, suggesting that it would be a great way for us to sort of study where, the difference is, and because again, the three groups that have to sign off on these preferred letters, clearly, we felt our hands were tied. The select board felt their hands were tied, but TROC did not think their hands were tied. And what I guess what I now see is sort of a, Jan, just by any chance, did Kyle ever send you those links to the videos on the discussions? He wrote in the letter he wrote to you, I thought we included in the packet, where he said that the T-Rock was only just now understanding how the amendments were going to affect town plans and towns. And he said,
well, the way he put it, because he wrote back and said that it wouldn't. I had asked specifically, do these amendments change what towns can do with their enhanced energy plans? And his response was, no, not really, because if it had, they would have published new guidelines for enhanced energy plans, and they didn't, which means, at least from the state's point of view, the criteria and the things that you look at and the things you have to have as part of one of those plans didn't shift based on those revisions. That's the way Kyle put it. Because
well, that's not true. With Aaron's, they just the 3 over the 3 acres was a concern for
Aaron's isn't over 3 acres. That wasn't what they got them for. What I'm curious about is the specific things that Two Rivers talked about: forest blocks, deer yards. Are those something that the municipality can look at?
No, they did bring up the fort. They brought up the ambiguity in his proposal, was that it wasn't a clearly defined 3-acre parcel. They said it was so undefined that he did not come down to say, yes, we are not going to go over 4 acres. So they did bring that up as a concern.
Yeah, I remember, because then they said, you can come back and talk to us later if you tell us if you can tell us more about what you might clear.
Right. I just found it really fascinating to see that they could do that. And then I kept thinking, the way that the changes were made, it just seems to me that
Well,
I got the impression that they're actually throwing more weight on the plan commission and the select board to actually review these more at that kind of level, to be a little bit more.
Really?
I got that.
so
I
I
got
think
that
they're
impression.
asking us to follow the town plan, which clearly states that large forest blocks are to be protected or to be treated carefully. And certainly in policies, it's right at the top. It tells us to take care of steep slopes because those are important. And so if we are to try to look at it throughout the entire town process, rather than simply, as it's gotten narrowly defined as ridge lines, which don't seem to be particularly valued in the town so far. And what was the other one? I'll think about it in a second. But I think that if you go back to the very beginning of the town plan, it says policies, and it says, in plan development to maintain the historic settlement practice. And then it talks about where is it?
Number 7, follow the ridge line.
Yeah, I know, but there was one that I was looking for about forest, about protecting forests, and certainly about forest blocks over 500 acres, which is what they're, that's a key thing within the plan. And I think that what happens in our town is we go between this plan and the zoning, and we bounce around to figure out which, we're not clear about what are we looking for. And what's important is we're going to give this all important permission for people to go forward with solar development in our town. And so I do think that this letter should be a time for us to pause and think about how do we create a matrix that say, what are we going to look for as we review these plans, so that we can feel confident that we are abiding by the town plan as we give our permission.
I don't know if anyone's remembering that forest blocks are actually protected by statute.
Yes.
So we can't really do anything with those to begin with. I mean, we're actually supposed to do everything we can to avoid interfering with them. And and keeping in mind that a forest block is not something that's owned by one person. It can be an aggregate of a bunch of parcels that have contain 500 acres of woodlot in them. And that's considered a forest block. And we have to be a lot more careful about forests now than we used to have to be, because forests were never called out so specifically as they are in the relatively new forest block regulation.
So that's a great point, Ernie, but what we're saying is the select board and the planning commission just said, sure, go ahead. We signed off the letter and went to the T-Rock, and we ignored all that. So,
well, they can't. T-Rock's going to come back and tell us then, or should tell us that the forest blocks have to be. And the other thing about forest blocks is that they most likely cover ridge lines. So even if there's no statutory ridge line protection, the forest blocks cover the ridge lines for the most part. So ridge lines are protected under the same law. They may also be included in the statute.
Do you have a reference for that law, Ernie?
Not on me, but I do have it buried in my files and stuff like that. I mean, it's not hard to find. I in a prior iteration of the planning commission, I had it off the top of I had it memorized.
The
it's
A&R
2.6, and Jan, it's in 2.6 in the town plan, if that's helpful to you.
Yeah, that I was talking. It sounds like Ernie's talking about a state statute or an
right.
It's a state statute I'm talking. Yeah, and the town's never been happy about my calling out forest blocks. In the prior iteration, every time I mentioned the word forest block, I got the Jeff Goodrich treatment.
Well, we're not, I don't think
So-
we can ignore it now because
No,
you know,
no, it
the-
couldn't have
the-
been ignored then either, but we have a much more careful and responsible planning commission now.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think about the, like you said, so there's a state reg, there's the current town plan, there's wherever we're gonna go with the town plan. So for example, if with the current town plan, if someone wanted to cut 2 acres, not in the ridge line, and we have default preferred solar in the whole town, what is the power of the planning commission to say at that? Now, that's part of the reason we want to change the plan to yank that word default out. But as it stands now, if this project, say, was just a whisker out of the ridgeline, what say do we have with that word default in there?
If
So
it were in
I-
a big forest block, is that what you're asking, Jan? Or
It's
not?
still, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm saying I'm trying to picture like which slice of this whole pie is whose responsibility, right? A&R has a whole block of things. The state has, the regional commission, the planning commission does. And the planning commission, highest level, the planning commission's job for these is to say it is in alignment with the town plan. I mean, that's
With the
that's
town plan,
usually-
exactly.
yeah,
That's what I've always
usually our
understood.
job with a whole bunch of things, like Connecticut River relicensing, all these sorts of things. It's
Yeah.
usually planning commission says, is this consistent with the town plan?
Well, the
And-
thing, it seems to me, first of all, we know the town plan needs to be revised earlier than was planned. I'm not sure, I can't remember when the forest block statute or section was approved, was made law. Because I'm not clear that the town plan actually cites it properly. But if especially if the law came into play after the town plan was written, I mean, because the concept of forest blocks existed before, but the town plan is out of step with state law now. I mean, so that alone, just the forest block, and there are other parts too, but just for the forest block alone, we have to revise it.
Well, and again, so here's another thing that what Kyle sent back to us, and now we have to start looking at is the specificity. So the Creechy test. So from now on, it's not like even though the A&R and the state protects forest blocks, and we have this sort of amorphous ridge line, but the ridge line is only protected by a certain road. I was just staring from my house, my family's house on Waterman Hill, and the ridge line all along Petrel is a protected ridge line. But the reason why somebody actually got to build a house up there was because it couldn't be sited from Union Village Road. And I thought, well, of course you can't. So it goes back to the specificity that, again, I really wish we had put Kyle's letter in the, although all he did was regurgitate,
Yeah, I mean, I can pull it up. I think
Well, no, it's in 5112. So, and I did, we added the 5112. But it seems that we have, here are the 3 things that I still would really like to know at this point with the change. The preferred site letter now seems to, based on the new rules, just signing off on a preferred site letter, there seems to be some, I'm not quite sure what it is, but the way Katuki had written to us, and reading his letter, the town doesn't, the select board doesn't have the authority to just hand over these preferred site letters, or not it's not the letters, it's the way he worded it, I thought was really interesting. The town, there is just something about I really wish I had it in front of me, but we could go
I
over
have,
it.
I have Chris's thing in front
He
of
said that,
us.
did you say the one part where he said, why, read it in the first paragraph.
The first, yeah, just to be clear, in Chris's letter, the first paragraph is about this stuff. The second one is a specific sort of editing reference
Tier
to
three,
the
tier three,
draft. And the third one advocates for prime ag and forest blocks. So the first one is the one that relates.
Yeah.
So with respect, okay, the first thing is about the designation of areas under, if you're trying to be specific, but use the word area is what he means. The new rule amended the definition of preferred site. It
Yeah.
eliminated the authority of towns to designate preferred sites in the town plan. Now, I'm not sure I agree with that statement reading the 5100, but wait for a minute. See the red line version attached, and it's at the bottom of his. It also requires review of the 45-day notice for the project. In light of these changes and the existing reference to a specific location, I am not confident that it's proper to designate areas as preferred locations. So I read what he's saying, and I certainly read 5100 to say you still have you have two things. You have the requirement for a clear community standard, and that clear written community standard still has power, still is important. But I think Chris's point is you can't just make a broad brush and say you can't have them on ridge lines, or you can't have them on, anywhere west of this road. You have to be specific rather than areas. That's, I think, what he was saying.
Right.
I think
so
we
going
need to
back
get
to-
it.
Clearly, the Queechee test is still there.
I think we need to find out if that's true. So
If which
Mary, what
part
is your
true?
interpretation?
I'm not sure that it's correct. So I think we need to find out. So
And-
that's
But sorry,
what-
to which question, Mary, are you, what is true?
I'm not, I think that, look at, I'm not enough, I'm beginner. I don't know that what he's saying is accurate. So I think that it needs to be reviewed.
Yeah.
That's what
well,
we're
that-
trying to
I didn't-
do.
because If I look at the new 5100 under definition of a preferred site, number 7, which is the one that's got anything interesting, the rest of them, it's the same things about brownfields and landfills and gravel pits
Mhm.
until you get to 7. And
Okay.
then 7 says a specific location determined by governing municipal legislative body and municipal and regional planning commission. So that's the 3 bodies that do preferred site letters. But then it says, as suitable for the development of a net metering system consistent with applicable policies in their respective plans. And then it says it must be identified in a letter within a certain time and so forth. But the point is consistent with their respective plan.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
you're writing the letter based on the planning
The town plan.
commission's interpretation of the town plan. And because the town plan will say in 2 sentences, we're promoting renewable energy and we're saving saving the forest blocks, there's going to be interpretation and judgment associated with that. But clearly the definition of a preferred site in the new thing says, I just don't like the words applicable policies.
I know.
That's just extra words. If they just said consistent with your respective plans, that would be easier, but it says consistent with applicable policies in their respective plans.
Okay, so now what I want to point out though is if you can pull up his red line version, and it's not what's in there now, it's what's missing. And
Yeah,
what
I got
our
it.
town plan was based on, and I think that's what Chris is trying to address. is that our town
So
plan.
what
was
he
based
says
on-
what they crossed out in the one that he sent
Right,
was a preferred site, still preferred site definition section, a specific location designated in a duly adopted municipal town plan, BSA such and such, for the siting of renewable energy plant or a specific type and size of renewable energy plant, provided the plant meets the siting criteria recommended in the plan for the location, or a specific location is identified with a joint letter. So,
and there it is, the letter. It comes back to the
and then it
letter.
wraps back around to a joint letter of support from the legislative body, municipal and regional planning commissions. But I think the difference is the old one said a specific location designated in a duly adopted municipal plan.
And that's where,
And the
again,
new one says a specific location consistent with applicable policies in their respective plan.
okay, and this is
So I
where
think what Chris is saying, you can't point in your plan a priori to, you can to gravel pits and so forth, because they're already called out separately. But to anything that's not a gravel pit, brownfield, so forth, you can't say that's a preferred site before anything else happens.
And what is unique and why I think Chris brought that up is that in any other town in the state that didn't put their entire town in a default preferred site status, Norwich is unique that way. And that's why we've been saying that. And I think we have a little bit more of an uphill battle because our town plan basically says basically everything goes.
Right.
So I think what Chris is bringing up is not just is very specific to Norwich in the sense that if we were in another town where they didn't have the whole town in a default site, this wouldn't be such a quandary. But because Norwich has already sort of dedicated it, the whole town, it's like it seems that the new, what he is saying is that we just cannot give, and again, this is why I thought that Lamperti letter is really fascinating for us to look at, and as well, Upper Loveland was a great one, because I would never have thought that T-Rock was going to reject them, because we didn't, because we all thought, again, it's default. Our hands are tied. What could we possibly have said to say no? And so we've run into, the timing was just amazing that, it says that we're not default anymore.
What
And,
do you,
Well,
and then add the specificity that the Queechy test and the PUC is insisting that we add to our town plan. It just, to me, it says, we just don't, when somebody comes up with a proposal over 150 kilowatt, it's not a slam dunk anymore. There's
well, it's also very clear the size of the clear cut can't be huge again.
yeah,
So right now,
the 3 acres
the
did
new
come in.
3-acre rule would completely negate the opportunity for the solar cut of 8.2 acres, which this group approved.
yeah, before
clearly it limited, it limits things going forward that are anything over 3. And that was part of T-Rock's letter. But I think the challenge is the Queechy test asks for specificity.
exactly.
It demands it, otherwise you got nothing. It's only, it's under the aesthetics section. It says, how do you assess the aesthetics of a net metering system? Then it explains the Queechy test piece of it and says, oh, you got to be really specific. You got to be really specific. But it does leave it, if I just get to that, it does say it's aesthetics and whether the project would have an adverse impact on the aesthetics and the scenic and natural beauty of an area because it would not be in harmony with the surroundings. If yes, move to step 2, and then violate a clear written community standards intended to preserve the aesthetics or scenic scenic, comma, natural beauty of the area.
Mhm.
So if the town plan, and then it gives those examples to say, you got to say it's this property to the left of Maple Hill, and this kind of development on that property. So
Well-
it seems like on the one hand, it's saying you can't be specific a priori about preferred sites, but then in the Queechy test part, it's demanding specificity. So
Well, if you
how-
look at the East Montpelier plan, which I think is really known as the gold standard in the town, is very specific. These are scenic roads, right? Our town plan doesn't say what road and scenic is and what one isn't. Our zoning has some reference to it. And so people say, oh, that's not a scenic road. Sorry. You might live on it and think it's scenic, but it's not. But but again, getting to that level of specificity so that people can then understand, what can be approved and what can't be approved. But we need to-
currently have a map. We have a map of scenic.
not in the
roads.
town plan, Jan.
Yeah, it's not in the town plan, but
Not in the
Rod
town
made
plan.
it
It's not
arbitrary.
in the town plan. There's nothing in the town plan that says this is a scenic road.
But the ridgeline map isn't in the town plan either. It's in the zoning bylaws. And so is the scenic.
No,
And
I
oh,
think
my-
there's a ridge line. Well, anyways, there's no scenic. The town plan talks about scenic, but it doesn't define scenic. The town plan talks about views from town-owned land, but again, those have, I think what I've experienced is we go between the town plan and the zoning, and people can argue whichever side supports their particular argument. And so, and there are contradictions, and that creates challenges.
But if for example, Upper Loveland, or if any of these, independent of the default question, if any of these were not in ridgeline or scenic, then you can't touch the bylaws. The only reason we got kicked to the zoning bylaws on Upper Loveland was because it touched the ridgeline, and then we had to go there for definitions. The net metering regs say very clearly zoning bylaws do not apply to these kinds of projects. Planning Commission is supposed to be looking at the town plan. So I think it's a very good question to say, make sure the town plan contains what you want, because in a pinch, you're not going to be able to get out of the town plan. You're going to be held rigidly to saying, how does this is this consistent with just the town plan?
Yeah, and did I just understand that you said that the town plan is where we're supposed to look for guidance? Not, I mean, like almost statutory guidance as where a ridgeline is?
What the state did, and I don't know when it was or which statute, but they essentially said to get net metering renewable projects to be able to go through, they said municipal zoning regulations do not apply to these types of projects. Boom, off the table. And then they put in this limited town municipality influencer to say, you can tell us, Planning Commission, whether this is consistent with your town plan. But your bylaws are off the table. They are not to be applied to this type of project.
However,
And-
can I just one point about that, Jan, and where Mary is absolutely right about it. In the policy section, it says, except for the ridgeline protection, scenic overlay, right? We consider Norwich a default preferred site. But the interesting thing is, our ridgeline protection only works because they never added the scenic roads, as she is suggesting that the scenic road inventory was not included in the town plan. Rod used the regulations in order to define Upper Loveland Road was not a part of the scenic inventory. So
But all of that was because that was before what Jan was just talking about occurred. at the time the town plan was drafted, the current town plan was drafted, it was considered purely an aspirational document.
I agree, Ernie. I remember that.
I mean, it is. I mean, it's the way it's drafted, so it's not at all appropriate. I mean, the more I'm listening to what's going on here, just in this one particular subject, the more we have obsolete that town plan is, and the more useless it is because it doesn't actually adequately address these issues at all. Because at the time, it was expected that the bylaws would be where you'd find the specifics.
Ernie,
So,
I remember that when we were having those big discussions at the select board hearings, I remember a conversation very specific about, as a matter of fact, somebody called the Secretary of State or somebody was really upset about the town plan. Half the select board thought it was a document with teeth, and then other people were saying, no, it's aspirational only. But now the sad truth is the PUC and 248 reviews are now only looking at town plans. So
the closest
your
the town,
point.
the closest the town plan ever had to having teeth was when the bylaws were drafted poorly and under Phil, they weren't particularly well drafted. There were conflicts and ambiguities all over the place. And so the only way to resolve what the ambiguities or conflicts was to go and look at the town plan and see if there was anything in there that could guide us on how we should interpret the regulations. This is when I was on the DRB. So, you know, the town plan is, this current town plan is still got the same problems because, you know, there first of all are conflicts and ambiguities. I should say the conflicts and ambiguities still are in our bylaws. And now we have a town plan that we're actually supposed to consult as if it's a statute or as if it's a bylaw.
Yeah.
So now we're kind of in trouble. So we actually have, you know, we did start to talk about redrafting the town plan early on when this iteration of the planning commission first started. So, you know, that we now have this subcommittee is pushing us to fix the town plan and go back to dealing with that too, because you know, that's what we're going to have to do before we can then move on to the town, the bylaws, which need really badly need updating.
Well, we don't have a choice on specific. I mean, the forest cutting is a given. So I mean, even if we don't have that updated before somebody proposes something, you know, it's an automatic. So
Right.
The 3 acres, if
Referring to
somebody,
the town plan, it's the issue.
yeah, the lack of
happen-
specificity is going to be our problem.
Yes.
well, but so just take it in steps for a minute. Certainly step one is yanking 2 sentences out which have the words default in them. And they're referenced at the top of my draft are the 2 places that would need to be changed. So we could conceivably say, okay, that we just got to get that out of there, and say, can we go to the select board? You got to do public hearings and whatever you have to do just to remove those 2 lines that say the whole town's default. That's sort of step one. And then the question is, what do we bundle with step one? If we're going to go through the trouble of hearings and convincing the select board to approve changes, what is the minimum? And, you know, say the 3 acre one that's already built into 5100, I don't know how much we have to restate in the town plan or how much that the state is going to take precedent. You know, they're going to stomp that no matter what.
So Jan, my suggestion is that we've already discussed with the planning commission and with this group that there are two things that have to be done. One, it's a living document and it needs updating. If regulations, state regulations change, we have to do it. So my suggestion would be that we start with you going before the select board and saying two changes. Remove the word default, and in our policy section under, I think under energy and perhaps under land use, there might be several sections that it gets included in all the policies that following state regulations, including, oh, by the way, no more than 3 acres cut in forest. Well, you know, however it needed to be, the verbiage needs to be written. But I mean, that's a regulation that this town has to now incorporate into the town plan. So I guess my suggestion is, you know, how many of these things do we want to, do you want to, I guess here's my question. It's going to take us a long time to come up with specificity. You know, is it, you know, J. Van Armen's field, you know, is not on a top priority, or your enhanced energy plan. But we already know two things that need changing. Now, is an amended town plan for a couple of, I guess here's my question. This is just an amended town plan. I think most other towns have no problem with doing a couple amendments, especially if they want to comply with state regs. This town, for some reason, has a meltdown whenever we talk about town plans. Like it's going to be this huge discussion about town plans, and it's going to take a 5-year process, and nobody wants to touch it, and it should be kept the way it is, when in fact it needs to be updated on a regular basis. So I guess my question is, at one point, do we need to actually go ahead and go before the select board and say, yeah, these are the changes that we are thinking about, and make our first amended thing? Go ahead, Bob. You're muted.
Have you reviewed the statutes on amending the town plan?
Yeah, I mean, the select board knows they have to do their hearing. They have to follow a. All we're doing, Bob, is bringing it before.
What do you mean, Bob?
Right. Well, I mean, the extended public hearings.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there are 2 public hearings. I mean, the select board, we are only making a recommendation, Bob. That's it. That's all we're doing. The select board knows there's a procedure.
Yeah, and that's my question is because there is this block of work, whether you change one word or 20 pages of the town plan, there's this block of work of at least one, I think, 2 public hearings back and forth with the select board. So it behooves us to bite off the right size chunk.
And that's why I am saying
not too small and not too big.
And that's why my suggestion, removing the word default in itself, I think, and complying with state regulations in this town is going to be a huge, if we add more, it's going to, I think, add complications if you throw in an enhanced energy plan. So that's why I think if you just go approach just 2 or 3 right now, including the scenic ridgeline protection, you know, those 3. I'm Jan, I don't know if Ernie was. I don't know if you were involved. I was involved with the writing of the town plan and amending it. It was a nightmare. It was encompassing. It was a nightmare. It caused incredible amount of anxiety and tension. And so I would suggest that biting off smaller things in this town, because this town has an incredible ability to react. So to me, it would be.
So if we just thought about it that way, if we said, we're going to come with the message that says we are making a few, we're not going to call them minor changes, but we're making several very targeted changes to the energy section of the town plan. Several of which are to be consistent with new state regs, and that's required. And then the one which is to get rid of the 2 places where it says default. And somehow we need to be realistically minimizing, to your point, Chris. If we don't want to poke the entire hornet's nest, we want to sort of come to the hornet's nest at night when they're not so active.
No, we're gonna
How
poke the
do
hornet's
we-
nest, but
But
Jan,
what
I
are
think
your
we're gonna
three? So when you said scenic and ridgeline, I'm trying to picture what changes are required to those and how does it fit into the minimalist package?
I would suggest we need to identify ridgelines. We
I
need to
do
name
too.
them. We need to name them in the same way there are maps that name forest blocks. We need to name this is a ridgeline. And to the extent that we need to, I don't know that, I think naming scenic roads is going to be very problematic and get into issues of privilege. Oh, you live on Bragg Hill, an expensive real estate, that must be a scenic road. This one isn't.
there is,
But
Mary,
I
there
do
is an
think that
inventory
the
list.
ridgeline can be
How
designated.
how is naming the ridgelines better than the map?
Well, you name, when I say name them, call them out. This is a ridgeline. Like,
Specificity.
let's
But
map.
we have a map,
map
and
the ridgeline.
theoretically, you can say in or
In-
out of that ridgeline, and we'll put it on the parcel map any day now, so that you can say, is my property ridgeline, yes or so? We should be able to answer a binary question: is this property in a ridgeline?
On a ridgeline.
Specificity. Bradley
There
Hill,
is a map
Farrell
too
Hill.
that outlines the ridge lines. I mean,
Yeah,
Not in the,
that's
is
what I'm
it in,
saying.
is it in the town plan,
No,
Ernie?
No.
that's
No, it's not.
That's what
point.
that's what I'm saying. We
It's
need it in the town
referenced,
plan.
it is, it's in the bylaws, and that's
Right.
the,
So it needs to be in the town plan.
so whether it's the map or a naming, but it's specificity of, and this is the question. So what level of specificity needs to be included in the town plan
Policy.
in this first round of amendments we are contemplating?
I would suggest, first of all, you know, we have, I think, a definition of what a ridge line is, correct? Or do
Well,
we?
we have it. You can tell from the map.
There's a
It's
map.
300 feet on both sides of the high point of these particular hills.
I think to get you know, to the best way to get specificity is to simply get rid of the extra qualifier, which is to say from a road, you know, those ridge lines, if I remember the map, they pretty much follow sort of the topography of the town. They don't really necessarily, I don't think those.
Yeah, they
those-
don't take into account viewscape. They
Right,
are
that's
literally
what I'm trying
somebody in a mapping program dropped a line along the top of the ridge and then said, give me 300 feet on both sides.
That's what
And
they
that's
look like.
why they look like these worms going across the top of the hills. They don't say, oh, this ridge can be seen from this big road, but this ridge can only be
Right,
seen from
because
this small
it
road.
gets rid, that map gets
It's
rid of,
topographic.
that map
Beyond-
gets rid of
Oh,
the,
sorry.
or I should say, gets rid of the ambiguities and gives us a specificity that we
Right.
have to have. It's quite specific. It's very mathematical.
John? Sorry,
That's all right. I'll get even later.
I'm just thinking if you can read Kyle's, I mean, he extrapolated that from 5112, but can you read Kyle's thing where he brought up the exactly what Mary's saying? Specificity on paragraph 2 of his what he quoted. It said, you cannot just say we want to keep the green mountains pretty. It
Right.
said which green mountains, name them. It's the same thing.
Right.
So those, and again, to me, these all have to be incorporated in the policy. I mean, it's great. To me, the text of the town plan is very aspirational, but what the PUC is now saying, you know, they're going to have a lot more weight on your policy. So your policy is, you know, follow state regulations, and oh, by the way, the forest cutting regulation, the specificity of the ridgeline as
So-
stated, you know, which
Right,
ones,
right.
and then to getting rid of the word default is not just default. And I think those
So,
are,
yeah, I think what's really helpful here, what we're getting to is the requirement to move specificity into the plan. because push comes to shove, the bylaws are weaker. The planning commission has always the power to interpret its plan. The plan is the document that we keep getting held to, and the bylaws get taken away. So what we're saying is, let's move some specificity into the plan.
In
And
the
it sounds
policy
like
section.
we're saying the default clearly, ridgeline definition, a real usable definition of ridgeline, scenic definition that is useful and specific, whether it's named roads or definition. I mean, there were I read some town plans that said, you know, it was either class of town roads, you know, class 2, class 3, or it was amount of traffic on certain roads that would flag it. But anyway, define scenic, define ridgeline, get rid of default. So another one would be things like forest block. But again, what do we want for specificity in the plan to be able to?
Forest blocks
do
are
that?
mapped out too. We do have
Yeah.
forest blocks mapped out as well in this town.
Well, the
But
A and R is obviously
is
gonna.
it in the plan? That's the question.
Oh,
Because
it's
I
not in the
think-
plan. Oh, no, I'm just going
Right.
along. I'm just saying, you know, just making sure you're aware, because you're saying it's got to be put in the plan. I'm saying it's available to be put in the plan. We already have that information.
So the
And-
only thing that I'm suggesting right now is that we limit this first round of amendments to not have everybody think we're trying to rewrite the town plan. If the town plan as it stands is perfectly adequate, it is primarily aspirational. It's when now we get into the policy. And now the PUC is saying your policies have teeth. And it seems that we don't have to rewrite it. We need to upgrade the policies to be more specific and get rid of some of the ambiguity. Like you said, there are 2 places where the paragraph default is in there. That's clear. But it seems to me that we do not have to have this major discussion of working the town plan over again, and then Jan, the second layer of changes would be incorporating the enhanced energy plan part of it. And that could be, you know, 6 months from now, or however many months from now, just because I think it's gonna get much more into the specificity.
So, I guess one of the questions I would have though is if we're going to be making this comment about things like ridge lines, whether we want to really focus it on preferred siting, or whether we want to just say we want to protect our ridge lines. Period. You know, so because everything in this town plan seems to go circle around energy, which is one consideration, but it's not the only consideration. And we're the solar committee. What if somebody wants to come put wind turbines up, a bio, some crazy, bio generator type of thing on our ridge line?
Well, or
We're
some
talking-
large ugly sculpture that happens to be 150 feet high and put it on a ridgeline. I mean,
Right,
or a house.
right, or a house, right. And so, there are many places that are going to say in our town, we're protecting our ridge lines. And this is what's included and this is what's not included, as opposed to having everything circling around energy.
Right.
Energy.
So
I think our
we
plan
do
is
have to
how-
define development. You can
I think
do
you-
development,
I
but
think
you have
you
to say what
identified-
kind of development.
That's Mary. I think you're the first person I've heard put sort of what was the problem with our town plan, is that it kept on circling around energy and affordable housing, and it really only marginally addressed other things.
Right.
And that's been a problem, because we were trying to write in a prior iteration, we were trying of the planning commission, we were trying to start rewriting the land use and zoning regulations, and we weren't really making any progress because the town plan didn't really give us anything to change things with,
Mhm, mhm.
except that.
Yeah.
But I think I wanted to ask you, when you're talking about you were sort of like earlier on, and I wanted to grab you then and ask you, but things have just progressed yet. It sounded like you weren't comfortable with just using the maps as an identifier. Did I understand you correctly? Because I mean,
I think we need to look at, if the maps are clear, then that's fine. I would have to go look at the ridgeline maps. I just want to make sure that it's clear and that we know what's a ridgeline and what's not. And then if we start parsing, well, that's a ridgeline that's got a house on it. So is that different than a ridgeline that's got trees on it, or a ridgeline where somebody 20 years ago put up a solar tower thing, and so therefore we can trash the rest of that ridgeline? So my sense is that if we're going to say we protect our ridgeline, if there is some man-made structure on it, it's still a ridgeline. And so we are looking kind of now going forward, how do we think about that? So if we say, we've got a high elevation overlay district, with at a specific, geographical features, then how do we view that land, and what do we want for that going forward in our community? And not just talk about energy and what's there. Is that helpful?
Yeah. I think the word is development, and this is mentioned. It's on the Queechy test, which is what type of development is appropriate there in these places. So it's not just solar, it's not just housing, it could be a windmill, it could be anyone. But so we want to be specific in the plan about the type of development that can happen in ridgelines, scenic, forest blocks. And that's generally what we're talking about. The interesting, we talked about this before, there's this link between scenic and ridgelines. Basically, ridgelines are describing what you will see from afar. It's the observed. And then scenic is describing it from the point of view of the observer. It's saying, I'm on this road that is scenic because it looks at those pretty ridges over there. And so they're related, but you have to, so because they're related, we just have to make sure that they're complementary and not, so you don't say, it doesn't matter if you can't see it from these roads unless it's a ridgeline. And that's fine if the ridgeline by itself in the middle of nowhere where no one can see it still matters, still justifiably is special. Like a wetland. Wetland doesn't matter who can see it. It's useful, special, and so forth. But if you say the value of a ridgeline is because it's supposed to look pretty, now you've linked scenic and ridgeline in a way that you have to address consistently.
When we initially, in the late 80s, when we were doing all the resource inventories, ridgelines were included not because they were pretty, but because of a number of practical matters. They're a good place to, they're difficult to access for the most part anyway. So, the hillsides, as they start to approach ridgelines, become more susceptible to erosion. So that's a bad thing. So we were trying to keep, we weren't at that time, we weren't there to create regulations. We were just saying, here's ridgelines. And the reason we were identifying the ridgelines is just like water, just like wetlands, it's that they have value that's beyond aesthetic. There's environmental, there's practical, a whole number of, so those were the original reasons. Somehow in the intervening, 30 years, ridgelines have become an aesthetic issue. And that's why the scenic thing crept in there. But originally it was every ridgeline, every top of every ridge and hilltop was included. And you didn't want, for good practical, scientific, environmental,
it could just be the impact of development is greater on a ridgeline.
Yes.
Erosion, length of driveway.
And it becomes dangerous and impractical too. If you build a house on a ridgeline, you can't get a fire truck to it. I mean, again, there was erosion.
Yeah.
There was a raft of reasons, and I'm just remembering some of them. and the same goes for forest blocks. Now, you're not protecting the forest blocks because they're pretty. They're protecting them for a big thing is CO2 sequestration or carbon sequestration and oxygen regeneration. You know, you cut down your trees, you cut down the best air recyclers we got. And nothing in technology.
Amen.
I knew you'd say that. But that's true. It's an actual honest to God fact that doesn't get discussed much. But forest blocks are the way you get oxygen and you control carbon dioxide. And a whole bunch of other things too. But it's not aesthetic. Some people are going to claim it is.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
very practical.
So it does seem like this is helpful because I think we're getting somewhere in the sense that what we're trying to do, what we're saying we want to do, is pull specificity into the town plan on a few of these items, ridgeline, scenic, forest blocks, and for each of them, justify it with their intrinsic value.
Can I add another
Not
category?
all aesthetic and scenic, but why we don't have to do it with things like wetlands because it's so obvious that the state does it for you. But that's the kind of thing we want to do. Forest blocks are valuable for this reason, and this is the kind of development that can and can't happen. Ridgelines are valuable for this reason. This is the kind of development that can and can't happen. That kind of thing.
I also want to add another category to it, which is ag lands or farmland.
Which is what that was Chris Katuki's point too. Basically, forest blocks and ag lands should be more sacred than they sound like in your draft. Was what he was.
Yes.
So going back to what I was saying earlier, though.
Sacred, by the way, I'm sorry, Chris, just a second.
Yeah.
Sacred's a bad word to use.
What is?
Sacred.
More scientifically.
They're irreplaceably valuable.
Right.
What do we think about identifying industrial lands in town then? Because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about building these large things. And so rather than saying it's a preferred site, why don't we say, here's an industrial site. Here's where you can build these things.
So that's what Jan's working on with the enhanced energy plan, where I think that I still like the 3-tiered approach. I think some of Chris's comments were really, really great about that. But the one thing I keep going back to is, in order for us to do an action, we could keep going on this for months. We do have to comply with the state reg now, even though T-Rock and the PUC is going to shut down when somebody comes before. So I keep thinking, the next person is going to come up, not just Lamperti. Somebody else is going to come up with a 500 kilowatt park, and we're going to be, our hands are going to be tied again. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is typical of this town. Until we get the enhanced energy plan, which would incorporate what you just said, Mary, and what Ernie was saying, without a complete rewrite of the town plan, if we just go after the policies in the energy section, I think we cover ourselves while the rest of it is growing without taking off too big of a
What would you
chunk.
say, Chris, then what do you think is the minimum bite-sized chunk for the first round of amendment?
I think we look at the policy section. That's why I included it. I think we look at the policy section and make sure that we're in compliance with the state regs, do exactly what Mary was saying, specificity with the ridgeline protection, because that's the only thing right now, and remove the word default. And that it does not, again, we are not precluding any kind of solar development at all right now. It's not taking away preferred sites. It's not stopping anybody. It's just currently it allowing exactly what the PUC is saying, that we need to go through a review, the 45 review period, with just a little bit more exactly what just happened with Aaron Lamperti's thing. The T-Rock, we blew it off, but T-Rock didn't. So I would just say that's, don't bite off more than we can chew, I think the enhanced energy part and all the changes you're talking about
Oh,
making.
I mean, I agree with you, Chris, and Rob's got his hand up, but I agree with you that the entire to try and get over the hurdle of an enhanced energy plan is more than we should try to chew on the first bite.
That's months, I think.
And so we're backing off of that. I think just knocking out two words, two places where it says default is too small a bite to be worth the trouble of going through all the macerations. It's somewhere in between that. And if it's as simple as definition of ridge lines, definition of scene, or even just pulling those maps into the plan and referencing them and saying, a line or two about development, the importance of forest blocks, the importance of scenic, the importance of ag lands, so that the planning, because this is always going to end up with the planning commission interpreting the plan. That's unavoidable. That is what is going to happen the next time an application comes in. Planning commission interpreting town plan. And so you're not going to get it so that interpretation doesn't happen, that a judgment call doesn't happen. You're just trying to get it more specific so there's a little less interpretation required.
Well, that's why I'm going back to what Mary said and saying, so right now, currently, the only thing that is protected in the review process is our scenic, our ridgeline protection. And it is so ambiguously stated, it is worthless. So that's why, again, that one paragraph just needs to be adapted. And I do believe that I agree with Mary that that we should for the exact reason, if you read Kyle's blurb to you, it says, do not just say we are interested in preserving ridgelines. It's not enough. So again, just addressing those three things to me would be, as there seems small attempt, but yet it's a huge attempt. It's bigger than we think. Go ahead, Bob. Does anybody else want to say, Bob?
I was curious as to whether or not you are planning to take these restrictions and apply them equitably to all development in town, all land use in town, for home sites, property, any other development whatsoever.
That would have to be the way it's done.
Absolutely. Mary just said it. I think she said it perfectly. That, why are there houses like, again, Bob, I was just saying, I can see the house on Bradley Hill. It's right in smack in the middle of the ridgeline protection. I don't know why Phil let that house slip through 15 years ago. And it's ridiculous to say, well, we couldn't see it on Union Village Road. Well, yeah, duh. Who can actually see the ridgeline from, a ridgeline is up so high, how are we identifying roads that protect the ridgeline? It just seemed ridiculous.
Well, yeah, and one of the things I was wondering, or maybe it was Chris who said it, talking about what Kyle was saying. Don't just say we want to protect our whatever, which sounds aspirational. I'm not quite clear what I'm not exactly sure what he is actually asking for there.
I think he's restating the Queechy test statement out of.
Oh, okay, all right. So the specificity issue is
because it
I put that into the word.
defines clear written standard in 5112C clear written standard, and it tells you're not allowed to say, the agricultural fields shall be preserved. You have to say the agricultural fields to the west of Maple Road are scenic resources that must be preserved. That's the way the state law describes it. Gives an example of specificity.
Okay, because like for instance, the statute designating forest blocks defines it a little less location specific, but very clearly what they're talking
Mhm.
about, which is over 500 acres, doesn't matter if it's, 500 contiguous acres of forest. That's a forest block. It doesn't really matter where it is. Or if it's on top of a hill or in a valley. And same for ag lands too.
Mhm.
And
Well,
I think that's also the way wetlands are also defined is no one really says where they're located. They just say wetlands. And, they're protected.
Mhm.
Why they're protected is buried in layers and layers of papers and discussions and committee meetings and all kinds of stuff. But we all know pretty much that a wetland is important. Same now goes for forest blocks, ag lands, ridge lines, and all the rest.
So Rob, I don't know, you've got your hand up. Did you finish or did you have something more to say? I just wanted to make sure. Okay. But I think that it gets at whether we are, as a planning commission, going to define what, like, okay, a preferred site. Is it really a preferred site, or is this a site and this is what's permitted in that site, or which is, so, or do you have this is on ridge lines, this is what can be developed. In ag lands, this can be what developed. In industrial lands, this can be developed. So as opposed to, 'cause again, I think we get.
It's sort of, I was going to
Yeah,
say,
go
Mary,
ahead.
it's kind of like zoning.
Yeah,
Really, I mean, there are places that if we want to encourage development, there are some places in the town that can handle, for instance, I don't know if there's much for commercial development, but there are places where it might not be so bad to put houses, for instance.
yeah.
There are other places where, those landforms that I've been talking about, those are all, those are, pretty well defined as what they are, and what we'd have to do is just simply say, if you find this kind of land formation, this is, this it's forest blocks, whatever, you
Yeah.
can't, you're limited to what you are able to do with those places at this point. And for if you want somewhere in the plan to explain why for each of these things they're important, we can do that. It's like I said, it's science. It's available
Right.
for us to explain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
so
guess
go ahead.
Yeah, I think you hear about, both within the state and without of the state, a lot of people who are going to be looking to come up and do a lot of development up here, and I think that we need to be very protective of our landscape and think about what that means for,
Mhm.
what happens when somebody comes up from New Jersey, licking their chops about what they see as inexpensive land and ability to do some things on it that probably a lot of people in town wouldn't like. And I know that there's a sense of, well, let the PUC decide. And I can tell you, 2.5 years later and a lot of money, I don't think our town wants to be, I know we have this new thing where we're gonna have the right to, as a town, to contest things in the PUC. Well, that's going to be a lot of money that the town's going to take unless we get our plan properly identified.
Well, and the PUC is one thing, for energy projects, but the people from New Jersey may just as easily want to build an enormous ugly house in the wrong place. The PUC doesn't do you any good. And Act 250 doesn't do you any good if it's,
Right.
a small enough development. So, I mean, my question, and I don't know the answer to this, but I would love to hear, how do we get specific enough to pass the Queechy test with descriptions of things like forest blocks, ridge lines, scenic, steep slopes, ag lands, any of those things, but to Ernie's point, defined intrinsically, defined by their own characteristics and how development would impact them or something, rather than location specific. Very clearly, the Queechy test says, oh yeah, if you can give a 911 address for the place and say what kind of development, then you'll pass the Queechy test. It's like, but can I get so that I can say a slope of greater than 25% that has bedrock less than 2 feet from the surface that you can't put a driveway on? That seems to me to be extremely specific, but not location specific.
Well, you
And-
said something about wetlands, and that's a perfect
And they
example.
clearly do that with wetlands. They do intrinsic definition of wetland and then protect it very specifically and very strongly. And it seems to me like that's the kind of thing you want to do in your plan, to have it have as much weight as possible relative to clear written. You want a clear written community standard with intrinsic definitions of value.
And those
You know,
definitions
yeah.
of what those, some of those intrinsic definitions are already available in statute and other sources too. So, you know, as we're drafting this thing, we just basically quote the statutes. And where the statutes are somewhat interpretable, then you know, start putting down, you know, scientific data and things like that, that's available also. And maybe even, you know, certain specific locations if you want. You know, the like I said, saying where let's say in commercial development would be, we would basically say the reason it can be developed there is because it has none of those other protected qualities, protective qualities to the land. So, but then we don't, we then set a location for that because it has become what it is due to its lack of intrinsic qualities. You understand what I'm saying? So it just makes it more clear. You know, something that's defined by location. We can take one activity, the ones that are defined intrinsically, you can't take activities.
Right.
It kind of becomes automatic.
So before you guys, I'm gonna remind us that we are the solar siting committee. So I think if we get too far we get too far into the weeds of development in general, which I appreciate that they're intrinsically linked. I don't want to get so far off what are, you know, this sounds like a conversation we need to continue with the planning commission.
Well, I
Maybe
think
we should go back to, you know, the energy part of the whole thing and citing solar. And again, I'm not
Well,
missing that all of this isn't intrinsically linked. However, that's why I said, if we just bite off some small things that the solar siting committee is trying to say, we just have a rejection letter for Lamperti. And what I was just about to suggest is, you know, I don't want to keep using Lamperti and Loveland as examples. Here's
why
another
not?
idea. Well, no,
They're
I
good
do.
examples. They're good examples.
No. Okay, but I want to go to the next example, and we're gonna make up. So I'm gonna come up with, is anybody gonna be insulted if I said the Smiths? The Smiths the Smiths have just now come into, they've just submitted an application and they want to put, they're now taking, well, now it's only gonna be 3 acres.
which
I mean, now
Smiths,
we're gonna refuse them if their proposal is over 3-acre cut anyway. Now, I'm not quite sure if you can put 500. Okay, so here's the deal. The Smiths have just come up with a proposal on Bradley Hill. They're gonna clear cut 3 acres because that's all that's allowed, and then the other part is 10 acres in the middle of in an ag field. And
That would fail for various reasons right off the bat. I mean, ag would fail it. TROC would fail it for ag if we
Yeah.
didn't. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
that there are ways to slice this, but I
So-
appreciate the question of, again, it's how big a bite to take off here, and if we're citing now. By the way, we have a quorum of the planning commission, which is fine because it's a warrant subcommittee, but it's okay to talk a little more broadly here and then come back to the bigger group because we're pulling in another 3 of us. So, but I hear you, Chris,
yeah.
in terms of how we do it for solar but in a way that's useful. And I really want to research the methods that are available. And God knows they've been talking about the Queechy test for a very long time. So there have to be, very knowledgeable precedents and so forth of how do you achieve the threshold of clear written community standard in a non-location specific way for your town. There has to be. But we don't know them now. But I think you're right, Chris. It's still, how can we bound it to where it will make a significant step forward on the solar, because we committed as the whole PC, we committed to look closely at solar siting criteria and process a year ago. And so there's a reason it's front and center. And we know perfectly well if we try to open up the entire land use plan
Exactly.
that we're screwed and
Yeah.
and we're going to get buried in quicksand for 3 years.
Yep.
And so I think that's our creative challenge, is to cleave off just the minimum.
And the whole point of this exercise is that when the town reviews development, there's a board. They go before they come before the zoning administrator, the planning commission, maybe, and then the DRB, and then there are other avenues on a local level. The only thing, you guys, that we have to address right now is anything that has to do with 248 reviews. That's what I'm saying. And it goes back to what you're just saying. Biting off too much we can chew right now is really only that is going to be addressed in a 248 review. And if our hands are tied right now because the way it's written, and what's the point? Bless you. So that's why.
Right. So I think your point, what you're saying is correct. The difference between solar and other development is the state has yanked away our authority for the other parts of our review process, the bylaws, the subdivision regs, and so forth, that we can apply if somebody wants to put a big house on a ridgeline. We have other tools in a municipality's toolbox for that kind of development. The state has specifically stripped us of those tools for net metering projects, wind and solar.
Exactly.
That's why they're different.
And there are still, as much as there are waivers for, when you go through the DR, and I know Ernie's always been really has his issues with waivers, but I've always said, this is where I want to know about the preferred site letter and why you guys didn't let me finish with the Smiths. So
please, it's too late.
No, we still have a half an hour.
Are too hard on the
So
hand.
here's where
I just make a comment, please? I do think, though, it is the solar committee, and I think that's really important. I want to get that clarified, but I do think that, rather than everybody shining a light on solar all the time, again, look at the East Montpelier plan. It's a brilliant, gorgeous plan. I know Steve sent it to you. It doesn't talk about preferred siting. It just doesn't do that. It does not have the town plan revolving around energy. And I think that's, maybe that's too big a bite to take right now. But if we just take nibbles, then, maybe that's what we need to do. Let's clean it up. But let's also think about, what do we want the town to be? And let's get the town plan to align to do that. And maybe we're not all, I'm sure there's lots of opinions of what the town should be, but yeah, Ernie.
I just wanted to say that, I said it earlier, I think what we're trying to do here could be sort of a template for how we're going to approach the other pieces of things we have to do. And we have to just sort of think of ourselves as, right now we're trying to develop a piece in a jigsaw puzzle. And keep in mind that it's not going to have nice, clear delineations. It's going to have arms and tentacles in places where the other parts are going to fit into as well, and be prepared for that. I mean, when in my prior life as a design engineer, that, designing products, that was always how you had to think. You had to think that, this is the project right now and it's small, but you have a bunch of other projects that are all going to have to fit with this one. And I think we can do that. I mean, I quickly looked at that East Montpelier town plan. It is pretty good. And I agree with Mary that we shouldn't have, town's holistic. Why the whole thing is what matters, not just the energy, not just the affordable housing, not just, whatever else you want to talk about. It's all part of a thing, part of a whole, and we got to take it that way. So right now, let's try and keep this confined, but keep in mind that it's going to link up in a bunch of ways to other parts as well. And I think, that's not a bad, it's not an impossible, it sounds difficult the way I'm explaining it, like a, blithering idiot, but the point is that this is how you get things done. When you've got a big project and you have to start small.
Can I finish my point?
Go ahead.
I'm gonna go back. I won't use the Smiths, but I do need to know, and you were just Mary, it's exactly what you just said. The problem is right now, this town, the way it's set up, we are still going to be working with the same matrix. It's still going to be people coming before us requesting preferred site letters. So what I'm asking you is, what are we going to do until then? Now, it's only because T-Rock refused Lamperti. Both the Planning Commission and both the select board said, sure, go ahead, without any review. So I'm asking you guys, I'm asking you now, unless
so
we
that's valid, Chris. We could recommend to have the current planning commission look at the current town plan and give more guidance about, basically tighten up what we have and say that we're going to front load some more consideration of these things and say, no, we're going to, because there's a whole element of the preferred siting letter that is this catch-22 that says anybody can't get started, or they're not going to bother to get started on their project definition until they get a preferred siting letter, because otherwise it's a waste of money. And then they say, I can't tell you the specifics because I don't know them yet until you give me a preferred siting letter, and then I'll go find them out. And so, but I agree, and this is what Mary started with at the very beginning, which is, can we take, even before we touch anything, can we make a couple recommendations about how the Planning Commission handles preferred siting requests right now with the plan we have? Because anything we do is going to take months.
Nope. The only thing
even
we
changing 2 words, it's going to take months.
No, that's what I'm saying. And it's not just for the Planning Commission. The select board looks at the same criteria that we look at. So both of the bodies went ahead and signed off on a preferred site. So if in 2 weeks from now, somebody comes forward and they want to develop, 150, 500 kilowatt, and the obvious 3 acres doesn't comply, or the ag land doesn't comply, whatever, I'm still at a loss, the way the town plan is stated, do we just hand them a preferred site letter, or has this town ever refused anybody? Based on what? Has anybody refused anybody? So
the town plan is written to make it difficult to do that. But I think it's a valid question to say, what guidelines, given what we've learned and all the thought we put into it and talked to and so forth, what guidelines and processes can we put in place for the current town plan for doing a better job of reviewing preferred site requests?
Policy changes.
Start with that, because if you can figure that out in a month, then we get 3 or 4 months to do whatever bite-sized chunk of change we want to take on.
That's what I'm saying. Just change policies. They said it in the PUC changes. They're going to start looking at policies, and without doing a major overhaul, which is going to trigger the bee's nest in this town, address some basic policy changes. That's what to me, it's like, don't bite off, more than you can chew. But strangely enough, these are big changes.
Hmm.
So
So, Mary, what are you thinking is possible? No change to the current plan. What can we do better from a process, procedure, method to for reviewing preferred siting requests?
Well, I think that from my review, my read, town is pretty clear that ridge lines and the shoreline in the town are where we're not supposed to be building solar. And so, and then I also would say is that the town plan also talks about protecting forest blocks. It talks about protecting steep slopes. It talks about protecting view sheds. And so in some ways, I just don't even understand why we would consider giving someone a hall pass to put any kind of, preferred siting on something where we said, this is not acceptable. So my sense is that, I don't understand why we would do it. I mean, as Ernie said, a ridge line, maybe you can't see it, but it's a ridge line and it's protected by this town. And so I just, and I think there's lots of other things that are protected that we say we value in this, in this plan. And, TROC has said that, the forest block, I would say the steep slopes are going to take out Joy Kansas house, my neighbor, sort of neighbor. I would protect that too. So I don't see, so to the question about it, I mean, I think so my sense is we say, we value these parts of the plan, and folks, you got 90% of the town to go build your stuff in until we make additional changes.
Oh,
So, I mean,
that's
I
not
don't.
true, John. Hang on, that's not
Yeah.
true. Because what we're still all missing is that preferred letters are only really meant as a financial incentive for the town to move forward a letter of recommendation. Anybody could go ahead without a preferred letter and build and go before the PUC. Preferred letters are just
No, you
strictly
can't.
It knocks
Don't-
a few cents off you. Well, if you're a developer, the finances are significant
You
enough
do,
that
yeah, you do
you
not
won't
need a
do it.
preferred site letter.
But
you-
it'll,
Well,
if
but-
it saves you 4 cents a kilowatt hour over the lifetime of the project or whatever, it matters.
Yes,
Well,
yes,
so I
yes,
think
of course.
the other thing, Jan, to answer your question would be is to ask people then to give proper plans, because by the time the TRORC, reviewed the Upper Loveland plan, for example, they had a much more detailed plan that had it come back to this group, it might have been different questions, different conversations, especially if Rod
Okay,
Francis
so
hadn't been.
that's the kind of
So
thing
say,
I'm
look, I
looking
know it's
for.
going to cost you some cash to build out your plan, but we're not going to take a little dotted line that you happen to splash onto a easily done something on your computer, which we have no idea what the reality is of that, and say, this
Yeah.
is what you're going to do. So say, you know what, if you want to do this, you need to make an investment, just in the same way that if I want to make investment in a business, there's a certain upfront cost I need to do. And in order to get our approval, you need to have more information. So we can do a proper
Oh,
assessment.
right. So I think that's that we may be able to do, and I would definitely park that one and say come back to it. The thing about looking at anything other than for the current town plan, like what can we do better tomorrow when the next letter request comes? The town plan says it's default unless it's ridgeline, shoreline, or historic village. Those are the only, so you can't start talking steep slopes. You can't start talking forest blocks because they will just get their lawyer to waive section 3-2-H at you.
Exactly. And Jan, that's what's happening. So I'm trying to tell you guys what's going on in Brattleboro right now, or it's somewhere around the Brattleboro area. I can tell you right now, that developer could care less about some stupid preferred site letter from the town. I mean, this guy is building a mega, or he's attempting to build a mega solar park. And if you think that he's going to be thrown off because the town didn't offer him a preferred site letter, That's not his problem. He wants the land, and it's a huge, colossal problem for them because he's just running their town plan, they're running their regulations, and so it really comes down to, I don't know if there will ever be
I think it's just the Shaftesbury project you're talking about, Chris.
I don't know if it's the Shaftesbury, but
I think it's Shaftesbury. And here's another suggestion. Annette Smith, who runs Vermonters for a Clean Environment, she'll come and spend an hour talking with us and give us some suggestions. And she knows these regulations. She's advised so many towns on their town plans, and she's amazing. She's no nonsense, and I think we could learn a lot from her.
What strikes me is that
was it?
Annette Smith.
What strikes me is that, the town plan, Jan just talked about some limitations as to what we can hold somebody to. And I'm racking my brain to think of, are there any other phraseology? Is there any other phraseology somewhere buried in the town plan based on what I remember of it, which is not a good place to really start. But none of us have it memorized. So we really don't know what we can excavate out of the town plan. But another thing that we just, Jan has said a couple of times is, how can we do this without touching the town plan? And I'm not really sure if we can do anything without touching the town plan. But
well, I'm only saying that because we have the town plan we have, and it's not going to change for several months. So my only question was, what can we do better in the several months it takes us to change anything? Because we can't.
That's why I said.
Okay, all right. I see your point.
That's the phrasing. I am definitely in favor of figuring out what bite-sized chunk is the right chunk and biting it off and starting to chew. But it will take several months to chew even the smallest bite. And so we have the plan we have for a while more, and we'll get a few more applications before we get anything different. So I think the statement of, hey, we would like more definition in your plan before before we'll contemplate your preferred siting request is independent of plan. It is a reasonable request that still works with the plan we have.
So my question then sort of is, how, we keep talking about Aaron's proposal and how it got knocked by Torque. So Torque found something to stop this one. Why wouldn't we, what doesn't apply to other places in Norwich that applies in Aaron's case? I mean, I could just see putting up on my property, I'd end up getting the same result as Aaron got.
Well, I mean, when I first saw the TROC letter, in some ways I said, oh, good. We each independently did our job based on the tools we had, and they looked at it from their angle and said no. And it didn't necessarily mean we failed our job. It meant they were looking, I mean, like if there had been a regional
Could we use their decision as a precedent for how we proceed?
I don't know
Because
if we can look at the A&R. I think we've been told that we cannot look at the A&R, that's not in our purview. We can only look at our town.
Rod Francis told us that. I don't know that we know it's true.
You know what, Mary? I think that is a really good point, because that was the first thing I said when I read the letter, is that they said this was a review based on the regional level, not the town level.
think about
and
this.
What bothered me. I'm thinking, well, if the A&R knew it was a block that was not, you can't do anything with, why wasn't that something that should be a pretty important part for the town to have known?
The way our decision system kind of works is you start at a small in a small office, so to speak, and they make a decision, and then you go up to a sort of an appellate one, and you appeal, and I mean, Torque was sort of an appeal.
Not at all, Ernie. It's one of the 3 preferred letter people. That's not
right,
an
but
appeal.
Well, it's an appeal in that we could say one thing and they say the other, and they win. You know what
Well,
I'm
not
saying?
necessarily. I mean,
It's three independent reviews.
Three
that
independent.
Theoretically should be looking from their unique angles and and all three must independently agree. Now, I don't know the criteria that the select board is supposed to review against. The planning commission is supposed to review against consistency with town plan. And it's a valid statement to say, gee whiz, we can't evaluate against the town plan without sufficient details on your plan. That seems to me to be a legitimate statement. The regional commission has its own set of criteria that are in our maps and all sorts of things. If we had a town plan that didn't have 3.2.h that gave us only three other things we could look at, then we wouldn't have to rely on Two Rivers as our backstop. It's a good thing we have them as a backstop, because our town plan takes some of the dimensions we can look at away. But that's why it's a good process that has all three needing to do it independently.
So, by the way, Aaron did submit that 2 weeks before the March 1st amendments were accepted. And so,
But he would not have gotten it through with the 45 days.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think that would have been, and regardless of whether it's in our policy statement in the energy section, we would have said, I'm not quite sure how far you can go, but it would be, we're rejecting this based on the fact that you're clearing, you have not delineated, just like T-Rock did, you have not delineated to be less than 3 acres or less. Now, I don't know about being able to say if I knew that there was a deer yard there, or that it was I forgot the wording, I don't have it in front of me, but I mean, they said that, that was a very specific, not just any specific forest block.
Well, it was a priority one forest block. But,
yeah,
I mean, we can look at that's the point. The map, those A&R maps are on the Vermont GIS system. Anybody that wants to can look at them. And I could have told you that was a forest block. But it's not in the town's purview with its current town plan.
But I think Mary's right. How
deny a preferred siting letter. There are always going to be these judgment waiting calls, and we're going to be judging them anyway. If we didn't have that default statement there, we could look at 6 or 7 criteria and weigh them
right
when we were doing a preferred siting letter. And we have fewer things we can look at right now.
Yeah, and I think we need to get some specifics, because I'm looking right now at the transcript from when Troy McBride first came to the Planning Commission, and there's a lot of different things that he said. He said at one point Rod said, if the characterization of the site disturbance would change dramatically as a consequence of the wetland mapping, then the obligation would be on the applicant to come back before the Planning Commission and seek and indicate there's been a significant revision. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here, as Rod was saying, what we can do and what we can't do. And I think right now we need to get clarity on what are those things as we're reviewing these letters that we can review, and then say, as I said, let's have a chart. Does it pass here, here, here? And then be very specific, as opposed to, Aaron Lamperti bringing his neighbor who says she likes the project, where it's like, well, that's great, but you know what? That's not the rigor we need to have in these processes. And so I think that it's, bring Annette in who does a lot of this work, or get someone from the PC
maybe
or something.
T-Rock or various places that know, because I think that's the question. What I'd like to know is, what does the municipality have as both its powers and its responsibilities and its tools when reviewing preferred siting letters? And then we will look and we'll
You're
say,
saying
here's our plan.
Contained within the town plan also. You're not
Yes.
saying we can't look at our bylaws either.
Well,
So
and then here's a good example. When somebody goes before the DRB, it's very clear what the review process is for the DRB. But for some reason, when we're supposed to be looking at a preferred site, when we're supposed to sign off on a preferred site letter, we seem to be up in the air. Like, well, our hands are tied. We can't say anything.
Well, because
It's
DRB is a
because the
totally
plan
different
is a
kind of-
different document than the
It-
regulations.
And the
Right, but it's-
DRB is more like a court and we're more like a legislature.
I'm not, Bernie, the point of what we've been trying to say to you, it's not aspirational. We are now
Oh, I understand that
first
now.
leg of a 248 review, and the PUC is saying that town plan is as good as the
Got it.
regulations to the DRB, and that's it.
I understand that.
And we got
That-
nothing.
But the tool isn't written that way.
Exactly.
It's like somebody made a hammer and forgot to put the head on the hammer or something. But we're taking an aspirational tool and trying to use it as a clear written community standard that meets very specific guidelines. And right
And
now,
it was not written that, it was never intended for that. But it's stuck, we're stuck with it now. And I mean, I slowly, I know it's a little bit like trying to talk to Marblehead, but I'm kind of getting a sense of how this has to be put together. I mean, we're sort of hamstrung by the poverty of tools in our toolbox, which is the town plan, which it's like we have to use the wrong toolbox. It was never a toolbox to start with. I mean, but this is this is what we got to do. So to my mind, what I'm trying to think of is just, are there any phrases, any pieces, I'm thinking like a lawyer, but are there pieces in there that we can pull out, maybe not necessarily having to do anything with energy, that will, work with this? Since we can't look at other tribunals or anything like that either, we basically have to somehow find, this really limited tool and find the right words in it to come up with what we need to be able to say, so that we can do our review. And we can't pass it on. I don't think we can pass it on to the Development Review Board, which is exactly its purpose is for reviewing things. I mean, the Planning Commission's only kind of a reviewing body.
Well, Ernie, they have the DRB looks at criteria, and we've just been told by the amendments in 5100 that the PUC is now going to start having a much greater weight on policies, written policies in your town plan. I don't know why to me, it's like, address the policies for now. It's the first leg to the journey. When we've got the enhanced energy plan and incorporated into the whole plan, that's a whole nother thing. But if we want to temporarily have some more say in the review period, to me, it's like, if we don't just again address the policies. I don't know. Again, reading those changes, it is clear that they use the word policy for a specific reason. And so that just says it all to me.
Right, and I'm just trying to,
no,
I'm trying to figure out.
I don't disagree, but I think, so what we're saying is, I'm trying to parse it out for the sake of the minutes, if nothing else, that we have a time period starting now until anything can be changed in the town plan. And right now, what we're talking about is making the best use of the toolbox we had, which is a vague and constricting document. That's all we got. And at least one thing is to say, we want to see a more defined plan before we'll give a preferred siting letter, even if it fits that criteria. Okay, so that's the X number of months before we can change a thing. And then to your point, Chris, we definitely got to change some things. And we're trying to shrink that bite down enough so that it can happen in 6 months rather than 24 months. And that comes down to getting rid of default, defining certain things. Again, it still comes down to the state says planning commission has the town plan as its tool. So how do we make that tool work for us as best as possible? And that's the second tier of work here. And I think we need help. We need.
Well, then Mary, what was the name of the woman?
We need 3 or 4 resources that can answer the question. And whether it's new, however new it is in terms of what the town's, what is the state says, because Kyle's saying, oh, it didn't change that much. But what does that applicable policy statement mean in the new reg? What is how does the Queechee standard apply to the town plan rather than to a zoning bylaw? How do you get a clear written specific standard in a town plan kind of document? We need help with that. And then we can decide what minimum bite to take off and follow that advice and do it.
So
Well, Annette's your gal. She's amazing. She knows what she's
think
doing. And so I would really encourage us to just invite her to a meeting, talk with her and see what you think.
Can
Do we
you
have another
reach
meeting
out to
next
her
week?
and have her set, I mean, our next meeting would be March, would be,
April 9th.
April, well, it'll be earlier.
It's April, it's usually the day before, it's usually the week
following the
after.
planning commission. We went out because of the.
Yeah,
affordable
because we
housing.
put a hearing, so it would be the 16th.
When is it?
April
It's the
16th.
16th. Oh
Mhm.
dear. Okay, good. Good to know.
Yeah, it would be April
Um,
16th.
Because the planning commission meets the 9th. And we usually just stay on Tuesdays because otherwise you start getting. a
Oh,
lot
this
of-
is this group rather than the planning commission. Okay.
Yeah, this
yeah.
group. I
Okay.
think for anything this specific, the planning commission has enough stuff of other stuff to do
Okay.
that let's until
So
we
I'll
have
see if
stuff to
Annette can come to
propose,
this one.
especially
And
if
then-
there are 4 of
and-
us here.
And this is a special kind of meeting, Mary. This isn't necessarily a regular, even though we've.
No, I
kind of
understand.
So if she can't make it on a Tuesday, by all means.
I'll ask her. I'll ask
Yeah.
her.
Ask her
Yeah,
what
I mean,
day.
the 16th would be all our meetings are special meetings anyway, just because
Okay.
we're ad hoc-y enough that we, you saw it warned as a special anyway.
So
we
Great.
John,
can-
by the way, I see, so this goes back to what Bob was saying. And I hope this hits home to everybody. So we're thinking about making changes and making amendments to our town plan, which in the grand scheme of things, like we all used to think was only aspirational, and now it's turning out that, in a 248 review, it has more implications than we ever thought. So here's my point, and why I was actually concerned when Kyle wrote back and said, "Oh, I haven't really been paying attention to it. I don't think it has that much, I don't think it's gonna make that much of a difference." And that concerns me, given that he's a zoning administrator, part-time zoning administrator here, because if we're making such a big deal about a few minor changes to a town plan, when the PUC made changes to the 5100, they were a big deal. It went through a lot. It went through months of public hearings, public meetings. This was not a small change. For the same reason that Bob is alluding to the fact that the few things we want to change on our town plan isn't so small either. So I have a feeling that, more towns are probably going to realize the changes that the PUC has done, just as we are going to make changes to our town plan, and it will have an impact. But I
Yeah.
think Kyle needs to get on, given that he is our liaison. I think Kyle needs to step it up a bit.
Yeah, I mean, he's in a limited role, but I would overlap that with his Two Rivers role. So from the regional, because that's what I was going to do, was reach out again, really respond to Kyle's statement, like, I don't think this changes much. Go back to Peter Gregory and the whole Two Rivers and say, okay, hey, you just rejected this thing that we passed. Let's talk.
Exactly.
So, and then I've got to think, to your point, that other towns are coming to Two Rivers and saying,
Oh, yeah.
what's different? What does this do to my plan? What do I need to update? And then lastly, and almost most importantly, if we don't stay ahead of it, the developers will be ahead of it. I mean, the people who want to come and plop down the new, find a place to put something that may not be appropriate for Norwich we don't want them to be the lead and us to be the reactors, because then we're at a disadvantage. And so we need to think about it, imagine it, and say, what do we need to be ready for that? And so I think I will definitely go back to Two Rivers and ask that question. And I think we should get a statement, even just ask them very specifically, hey, Peter, you wrote that letter. How do you see the fact that the two municipal bodies said yes and you said no? Is that just a sign that you look at different criteria and ta-da, the process worked exactly how it was supposed to?
Yeah.
Or is that because we missed something? Or is it unique because our plan is what it is? And I would still I'd love to ask the select board, although might tie things up in knots, what criteria they use uniquely to do preferred siting letters. Because it shouldn't be the same as ours, and it shouldn't be rubber stamping ours. But what is it?
I totally agree. I think they have been rubber stamping, but whatever. There's nothing there. There's no teeth. If everything's default, there hasn't been any teeth. So,
well, or at the very least, we need to know that they're rubber stamping because it makes our job more important. Because at least one select board member, when they were doing their review, said, the planning commission approved this, that's good enough for me.
yeah, I've heard that many a time.
And so that means that the select board doesn't have an independent set of criteria. And I'm not sure they do statutorily have an independent set of criteria, but they absolutely are the third leg in the stool that's supposed to approve these.
Yeah.
So they need to know what uniquely they're looking at. If they're just supposed to say what the planning commission said and stamp it, there's no point in having the third leg in the stool. So, all right. So we're turning into a
wrapping it
pumpkin
up. So all we have to do now is so April 16th is going to be our next one, unless Mary can get a hold of Annette. I didn't get her last name, but
Smith.
that's
Smith.
Smith, the one you're building a thing on her property.
So yeah, Annette is coming to build a large solar project in Norwich, and we wanted to tell us about it.
All right. So if you want to get back to us, and again, I appreciate that she would even be willing to come, but let us know before we, we always have to get our minutes. We always have to get the agenda out the week before. So if you can just let us know in the next.
And we will have the advantage to the subcommittee structure is I'll do the minutes, and then the minutes will be seen by the planning commission. We got 4 of us here anyway. And then we have a planning commission meeting on the 9th that has this subcommittee on the agenda as a standing item. So we can have a little chance to catch up there with the whole group before we spit it back to the subcommittee. So we should make use of all those things. What research can we do in the interim? Let's get everybody to look at the minutes and see what we're talking about. Use the planning commission meeting on the 9th, and then, we can keep things moving.
Yeah. All right. So, does anybody have any last conversation points for?
Do you want to approve the minutes?
I do, but I just wanted to know before we move.
Oh, yeah.
Move minutes, if anybody had any more comments or anything else. Is that good?
Okay.
Right. So just, I guess, between me and you, the 3 of us, I move, or who wants to make a motion to move?
I would move to approve the minutes of 2/26.
Second.
Everybody, I guess, roll call, everybody in. John,
Go with it.
me, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Since you're the minute taker, go ahead.
I'll
Ira,
abstain. I wasn't here.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
All in favor.
So, and then specifically, if it wasn't clear to everyone, Mary's gonna volunteer at the PC meeting to be appointed to this subcommittee. So it'll be up to the whole group, but that will
You're
be,
gonna have to bring the beer next time.
yeah, it's Zoom
Happy
beer.
to do that.
Zoom beer, that's right. Zoom beer, Zoom beer.
Zoom beer is a thing, yeah, it's some sort of a gift certificate that spits out of your computer.
All the new members of the committee have to bring the beer.
All right. All right, so and then we've
Okay.
already, so I think that's it. We've
Yeah.
already scheduled the next meeting, and I think that we know the subject matter, so we don't need to add
Yeah,
anything
I
else.
will, I'll have it on the minutes.
Okay, and so just as a wrap up, there is nothing that we now have to do, and I am assuming that solar siting committee has nothing to do with Lamperti. At this point, the planning, it would go back to the planning commission?
I don't think there's a mechanism to make it go back. Just because Two Rivers failed it doesn't mean it changed our decision. We would have to decide to do something. As it stands now, it doesn't automatically come back to us, I don't think.
Well,
But-
I mean, we made a motion, we actually wanted to open up the review process when we were going through the Upper Loveland. So I almost think that it might be worth for us thinking about opening up for a review process so that, both the planning commission and the select board thinks long and hard how this all happened.
Well, let me ask, because this is perfectly legitimate for the solar siting subcommittee. So if I put on my chair of the PC hat and say, does the solar siting subcommittee want to recommend to put the Lamperti application on the agenda for a full planning commission meeting?
I would like to see it on the planning commission meeting just as a good review for us, for the planning commission.
Okay, is that Ernie?
Yeah, I
Aaron?
can go with that. Yes.
Yes.
All right, so we'll put it on the agenda. That'll be fine. We'll have a solar siting piece on the agenda on the 9th, and we'll have a specific agenda item coming out of committee on the 9th. So that'll at least give us some hooks to talk about it. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Anybody want to
Move to adjourn.
Move to
Second.
adjourn.
Move to adjourn. Second. Thank you all.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Good night,
Good
everybody.
night.
See you,
Good
Rob.
night.
Bye, Kathleen.